Well, here we are, arguably the world's most famous dive site and the largest blue hole on the planet. And I'm going down over 100 feet inside to see what I can find. If I were to ask you to name the most famous dive sites on the planet, what would come to mind? Possibly the Great Barrier Reef, Guadalupe for the great whites. There's definitely no wrong answers. But I know a lot of you out there would say the Great Blue Hole of Belize. This is hands down the most recognizable dive site out there, and a spot that Jacques Cousteau himself claimed to be one of the best in the world. This is what brought me to the country of Belize. The Blue Hole has been on my bucket list since before I started diving, and it was finally time to see what this adventure was all about. I did have to set the alarm for 4 a.m. today, but this sunrise is making it worth it. So today we're going to be doing 3 different dives and a stop at the island Half Moon Caye. It's going to be absolutely insane. However, it is a 2.5 hour boat ride all the way out there, which is why we have to be up so early. And so we were off. To make this adventure possible, I teamed up with Belize Pro Dive Center, which is one of the best I've ever dove with. They were absolutely incredible the entire time. Now, with pretty calm seas on this morning, the journey to the Blue Hole only took about 2 hours. And before I knew it, we were there. The Blue Hole is massive, over 400 feet deep and 1,000 feet across. The scale is so large from the surface, it would take a very long time to explore the Blue Hole from every possible angle.
It's over 400 feet of water, and today we are hitting a maximum depth of 130 feet of water for each and every single one of you guys. We get to around 90 feet of water, like I said just now. That's where the shape starts to cave in. That's where we get to see the huge stalactites.
So I got all geared up and hopped into the water. Although the surface temp was around 82 degrees, the Blue Hole experiences thermoclines, so we hit spots that were much cooler. But once under the surface, the scale becomes even larger. This isn't like diving a traditional coral wall, because when I say it drops off very sharply, I mean it. I started following our dive master Jonathan over the edge and into the Blue Hole. Now, the wall of the Blue Hole doesn't hold much in terms of life. A lot of algae and a few corals are near the top. Every now and then you can find an animal like this crab or an eel hiding inside the wall. But I didn't come to the Blue Hole for marine life. I came here for the insane underwater structures. The Great Blue Hole is a sinkhole, sometimes referred to as a cenote, and it was formed during the last ice age roughly 150,000 years ago, when sea levels were much lower than they are now. At the time, it was just a limestone cave, but as sea levels rose to what they are now, the cave was flooded and eventually collapsed, creating a unique vertical cave system that we see today. So technically, the Blue Hole is a cave dive. At this point, I was over 130 feet down from the surface, which is the limit for traditional scuba diving, so I had to be cautious for nitrogen narcosis. And it also means that we didn't have much time to stay at this depth. With the sinkhole being over 150,000 years old, the stalactites that you see here have had a very long time to grow to these proportions. They are by far the largest I've ever seen inside a cave. Not surprisingly, at these depths, there's still not a lot of life to be found. Some algae can be seen on the stalactites, but otherwise, not much exists at these depths. At 130 feet, it was hard to remember that I'm in the middle of the ocean with all of these cave formations. But that's what makes the Blue Hole such a unique dive site. After 5 or so minutes, we had to start ascending to avoid longer decompression times. We were able to hang around 90 feet for a few more minutes, and this is when the wall of the Blue Hole starts to come to life with more algae and some soft corals. Being over 400 feet deep and 1,000 feet across, there's no seeing the bottom or the other side, which creates an abyss from underwater. Looking out into the unknown is pretty fascinating to me. Anything could be right out of sight, and at times it can become kind of mesmerizing staring into the abyss. Eventually, we made our way back to the top of the blue hole. The dive was only about 30 minutes old, but because of our depth, it was time to get back on the boat. However, I found some time to explore the outer reef, and it was stunning. That dive was insane. It's one of the few dive sites that you don't actually need marine life to show up at. The formations are just so cool. Even though it's so deep, you know, you want to spend a lot more time down there, but it's still one of the craziest dives ever. The next dive site's about 15 minutes away or so we're gonna head over there, complete the surface interval, and get back in the water. And so we were off to the second dive site of the day, Half Moon Wall. It was only about 10 minutes from the blue hole, and the scenery on the way was absolutely gorgeous. All of the dive sites I'm visiting today are inside an area called Lighthouse Atoll. It's this huge expanse of shallow water and pristine coral reefs, a very remote diver's paradise. Eventually we reached the island of Half Moon Caye, and just a few hundred yards away from the island is a coral wall, which is known to be visited by big schools of fish and sea turtles. From the boat you can see the frigates and a few boobies in the trees, which I'll be visiting after this dive. But I got all geared up again and hopped back into the water. The visibility at this dive site was insane, well over 100 feet, which was a nice improvement from the blue hole. And the coral looked super healthy. At around 60 feet, the wall started to drop off. And right off the bat, we saw this sea turtle just beneath us. But sea turtles typically don't like big groups of divers, so this big guy went on his way. The top of the coral wall is filled with so many cleaner fish, along with angel and parrotfish as well. Walls like this are a fantastic spot to see bigger marine life, however, but on this dive we didn't see any sharks. Our dive master believes it was because a larger predator was in the area and scared off the reef sharks, so I was keeping an eye out the entire time. In around 40 feet of water just away from the drop off, this is where the most amount of marine life could be seen. So many healthy corals and schools of fish. This location is a diver's paradise, and the healthy coral is due in part to this location being so remote. However, this dive eventually came to an end, and after going back to back, it was time for a little surface interval, which would be done at the beautiful island of Half Moon Caye. This island is the definition of remote and pristine, well over 50 miles from shore and surrounded by beautiful water. Alright guys, well here we are on the island of Half Moon Caye. We're taking a break in between our second and third dives, get a little surface interval, get a little something to eat, and explore this beautiful island. I mean, look how pristine this beach is. This is picturesque. This water is like bath water too. It is so warm, so clear. You might have heard of the name booby before for a bird. The blue-footed booby is on the Galapagos. It's one of the most famous birds anywhere on the planet. And here you have the red-footed booby, which is supposed to be equally as beautiful. They're over there on the other side of the island, so we have to hike over there to be able to see them. Now that second dive we just did was stunning. That reef is one of the healthiest and most pristine I've ever seen while diving. We have done a couple of deep dives. The blue hole was over 130 feet, so it is nice to get a little surface interval here and just kind of enjoy some time here on the island. It is so beautiful back here on this trail, and that right there is what we're coming back to see. Boobies. You've also got to be very careful where you step, because you've got little hermit crabs right in the middle of the walkway. Once I got to the spot, the birds were everywhere. This island is just so beautiful. The lush forest with the ocean in the background is picturesque, and the red-footed boobies are awesome to see in person. This bird is very rare to see in the wild, so I made sure to enjoy my time with them. That was a really cool stop. I got some great footage of the birds flying over, and it's just so scenic, so peaceful when you get to the top of the tower there. However, we are starting to run low on time, so I gotta make my way back towards the boat because we have a third dive to make. Our third dive site is a spot called the Aquarium, and I immediately realized where the name comes from after jumping in. It looks like an actual aquarium. Vibrant, healthy corals and schools of fish everywhere. I knew this was going to be a good dive right off the bat. As we approached the coral wall, I discovered more schools of wrasse, angelfish, and other beautiful marine animals. The previous dive was void of any sharks, but the aquarium more than made up for it. We had roughly 3 to 4 different Caribbean reef sharks following us throughout the whole dive. This guy right here was smaller, only about 5 feet in length, but others were larger. Sharks like the Caribbean reef shark like to hang out on coral walls because it's a good place to hunt for shallower fish while still having access to deeper waters. It's also a very good place to see spotted eagle rays. Spotted eagle rays are one of my favorite ocean animals. This encounter lasted well over a minute, which is pretty unusual for an animal like this. But it's safe to say I enjoyed every second. And even though it looks like eagle rays are moving slowly, underwater they are very hard to keep up with. Every few minutes I'd notice another shark passing below. Sharks are actually really curious animals, kind of like a dog in a sense. And if there's one thing to know about sharks, it's that they're a lot smarter than you think. This is something I'm reminded of every time I see a shark in the wild. Now this might be the most stunning dive site I've ever been to. Besides for the shark and ray encounters, I was constantly surrounded by views just like this. With how much the warming oceans have affected reefs around our planet, it's so nice to see unspoiled sights just like this one. However, all good things must come to an end, and as much as I hated to see it, this dive was over. I had a lot of time to reflect on the over 2-hour ride back to the shop. Today was one of the best adventures I've ever been on. Getting to dive inside the Great Blue Hole is something every diver wants to accomplish, but it's difficult because of how remote it is. I'm happy to say that I'm one of the lucky who got to experience it. But not only that, the second and third dive sites were incredible. By far the healthiest reefs I've ever seen, and many unforgettable encounters. And getting to spend over an hour on such a remote and unspoiled island is something I'll never forget. With all of that combined, I got to experience some of the greatest sights the blue world has to offer. Stay tuned for my next adventure where I go night diving and film one of the craziest underwater moments ever.